Imagine losing everything overnight: your sponsors, your credibility, and your fans. That's exactly what happened to Logan Paul after the Aokigahara video. But instead of fading away, he reinvented himself in ways no one expected. What did he do to survive the internet's harshest backlash? In December 2017, Logan Paul, one of the internet's most famous vloggers, posted a video that would forever change the way the world saw him. Known for his energetic personality, loud antics, and boundary-pushing content, Paul traveled to Japan and entered Aokigahara, a forest known for its tragic association with suicide. The video showed him and his crew stumbling upon the body of a suicide victim. Instead of stopping the camera, Paul continued filming, laughing, making jokes, and treating the moment as entertainment. The backlash was immediate and ferocious. Critics accused him of exploitation, disrespect, and a complete lack of empathy. Social media exploded. News outlets condemned him, and fans who once admired his confidence now questioned his humanity. In a matter of hours, Logan Paul went from internet superstar to public villain. The scandal did not just damage his reputation, it threatened his career. YouTube removed him from its Google Preferred Advertising program, paused his involvement in high-profile projects, and publicly reprimanded him. Sponsors pulled away, and his influence, which once seemed untouchable, suddenly felt fragile. The internet had decided it was no longer willing to tolerate the shock content that had made Paul famous. In the harshest way possible, he had been taught a lesson. Fame is not an excuse for cruelty. But what happened next is what truly makes Logan Paul's story one of the most fascinating examples of modern reputation recovery. Instead of disappearing, apologizing, and hoping people would forget, Paul chose to rebuild. Not just his career, but his identity. The scandal became a turning point, a painful pivot that forced him to reconsider who he was and what he represented. In many ways, the scandal was the end of one Logan Paul and the beginning of another. The first step in his rebranding was the most obvious: apology. Paul released multiple apology videos and statements, acknowledging his mistake and attempting to show remorse. His first apology was criticized for appearing self-serving, so he returned with a second, more heartfelt one. He admitted that he had handled that power incorrectly and confessed that he should have put the camera down. His initial apologies were not enough to erase the damage, but they marked the beginning of a strategy. He had to show the world that he was not the same person anymore. Yet apologies alone are not enough to rebuild a public image, especially after something as serious as the Aokigahara video. So Paul needed a move that would be both meaningful and visible. He chose to shift the conversation from his mistake to the larger issue of mental health. In a surprising twist, he released a video focusing on suicide prevention. He pledged to donate $1 million to mental health charities and used his platform to promote awareness and empathy. Whether one believed him or not, this shift in tone was important. For the first time, he was using his influence for something that wasn't just entertainment. He was trying to make a difference, even if the sincerity of the gesture remained a topic of debate. What followed was a strategic and long-term rebranding effort. Paul realized that the only way to recover from such a catastrophic scandal was not to simply apologize, but to reinvent himself. He had to change the story people told about him. He could no longer be seen as the loud prankster who filmed tragedy for views. He needed to become something else entirely. One of his most effective moves was diversifying his content. Instead of relying on short, chaotic vlogs, Paul began focusing on long-form content that showcased his personality beyond the wild kid image. He launched the Impulsive podcast, a platform where he interviewed celebrities, athletes, influencers, and experts on a wide range of topics. The podcast allowed him to appear more thoughtful and articulate. It gave audiences a chance to see him as a person rather than a caricature. In the world of podcasting, he was no longer the guy who shouted into the camera. He was the host who asked questions, engaged in meaningful conversations, and demonstrated maturity. This shift was crucial. Podcasts are intimate. They require patience, listening, and vulnerability qualities that are difficult to fake. The format forced Paul to slow down and show a side of himself that his previous content never allowed. Over time, Impulsive became a vehicle for him to reshape his public identity. It wasn't just about entertainment anymore. It was about building a brand around curiosity, growth, and conversation. But Paul didn't stop there. He realized that to fully distance himself from the scandal, he needed to enter a new arena, one that would force the public to see him as something other than an influencer. This is where boxing comes into play. In 2018, Paul stepped into the boxing world, first in an exhibition match against fellow YouTuber KSI, and later in more high-profile bouts, including a fight with Floyd Mayweather Jr. At first glance, boxing might seem like a strange direction for a vlogger. But the move was brilliant. It positioned Paul as an athlete and competitor, not just an internet personality. The boxing world is a space where actions speak louder than words. It's a sport where success is measured in performance, discipline, and resilience qualities that can redeem a public image. Through boxing, Paul gained mainstream attention beyond YouTube. He was no longer just a controversial figure. He became a public spectacle with real skill and dedication. People who had never watched his vlogs were now watching him train, fight, and win. Boxing gave him a new identity. Logan Paul, the athlete, not Logan Paul, the prankster. It was a transformation that required effort, sacrifice, and discipline, and the public respected that. Paul also expanded into professional wrestling with WWE. As the Maverick, he stepped into a world of structured storytelling, athleticism, and entertainment. WWE gave him a stage where he could build a persona without the need for shock value. The ring became a place where he could prove his commitment to a new career path. His appearances in WWE, including winning the United States Championship, helped normalize him in mainstream entertainment. He was no longer just a YouTuber, he was a performer, an athlete, and a character in a larger narrative. Beyond sports, Paul also expanded his brand through business ventures. He launched products, licensing deals, and entrepreneurial projects that shifted public perception. He positioned himself as a businessman, not just a content creator. While some of these ventures sparked controversy, such as the Crypto Zoo project, the overall effect was clear. Paul was no longer dependent on YouTube views to define his identity. He was building a diversified career with multiple revenue streams and public roles. Perhaps the most important element of Paul's rebranding was the narrative of personal growth. Over the years, he spoke openly about the scandal as a turning point in his life. He described it as a wake-up call, a moment that forced him to mature and reassess his influence. He admitted that he looked back on his pre-2018 content as if it belonged to a different person. This narrative was powerful because it framed the scandal not just as a mistake, but as a moment of transformation. In interviews and podcast appearances, Paul began to talk about responsibility, influence, and growth. He acknowledged that he had been reckless and immature. He discussed how the experience shaped his view of his audience and the power of his platform. Whether or not one believes his sincerity, this shift in messaging was essential. It allowed him to move from a story of controversy to a story of redemption. But even with all of these changes, the scandal did not disappear. It remained a reference point in his public life. Whenever his name appears in the media, the Japan forest incident is often mentioned. Critics still question his motives, and some viewers remain skeptical of his transformation. There have been moments when he was asked about the scandal and chose to avoid the topic or leave interviews early. These moments serve as reminders that rebranding is never complete, especially when the mistake was so public and severe. Yet despite the lingering criticism, Logan Paul's rebranding has been remarkably effective. He managed to rebuild his career, regain a massive audience, and become a mainstream entertainment figure. The scandal did not end his influence. It forced him to evolve. So, what is the core lesson of Logan Paul's rebranding? It's that recovery after a public scandal requires more than apologies. It requires reinvention. Paul didn't just say he was sorry. He changed his path. He shifted his content, diversified his career, and built a new identity through sports, entertainment, and business. He turned a moment of global condemnation into a turning point that reshaped his life. In a world where influencers rise and fall with the speed of a viral clip, Logan Paul's story is a rare example of sustained comeback. He transformed from a reckless prankster into a complex public figure, one who still attracts controversy, but also commands attention, respect, and curiosity. His journey shows that in the age of digital fame, the only constant is reinvention. In the end, Logan Paul's rebranding after the Japan forest scandal is not just a story about one person's recovery. It's a story about the power of modern media, the dangers of influence, and the possibility of redemption, even after a mistake that seemed impossible to overcome. Whether you admire him or not, his transformation is a testament to the fact that in the internet era, reputations can be shattered in seconds, but they can also be rebuilt piece by piece through strategy, discipline, and reinvention. For more viral story breakdowns, subscribe and stay connected.